For 115 years, people played golf in Newark, Ohio, without much comment. Hole number 3 sat inside a circular earthen wall, 155 feet across. That wall was built 2,000 years ago by people tracking the movement of the moon. That golf course is in the United States, and it is not close to the strangest thing we found here. That place makes this list. So do 9 others. A soapstone boulder in a North Carolina cow pasture carrying more than 1,500 carved marks, not one of them ever translated. A wheel of limestone laid out at 9,600 feet in Wyoming, buried under snow most of the year. 11 earthen mounds in a Louisiana floodplain, older than the pyramids, found only because a logging crew took the trees down. Stick with us to the end, because number 1 is hundreds of thousands of bare human footprints pressed into a dry lake bed in New Mexico, 23,000 years old, made by people nobody can identify. This channel goes looking for the place's history left unexplained. Subscribe if that is your kind of thing. Today, we're counting down 10 reasons America is sitting on the most unexplained ancient land on Earth. Number 10. America's Stonehenge in Salem, New Hampshire. The mystery somebody built. 30 acres of hillside covered in stone chambers, standing slabs and low walls. It opened to paying visitors in 1958 as Mystery Hill Caves, and it has been sold ever since as a 4,000-year-old astronomical temple. The problem arrived in the late 1932 in the form of an insurance executive named William Goodwin. Goodwin believed Irish monks had crossed the Atlantic and settled New England long before Columbus. He bought the hillside and began moving stones into the positions he had decided they originally held. He was not hiding it. He thought he was restoring a monastery. Archaeology depends on things staying where they were left. Curtis Runnels, who has studied the site, notes that Goodwin rearranged so many stones that it is now impossible to know what is original and what is his. There is something genuinely old on that hill. Charcoal pits have been radiocarbon dated between 2000 BC and 173 BC. Then there is the sacrificial table, a slab cut with grooves that believers say channeled blood. It closely resembles the lye leaching stones colonial farmers used to extract lye from wood ash for making soap. The site is still operating. Gift shop, snowshoe trails in winter, alpaca farm. Somewhere under all of it, there may be a real ancient site. Goodwin made certain nobody will ever be able to prove it. Number 9. Judaculla Rock, 1,548 marks, 0 translations. Jackson County, North Carolina. Open pasture in a narrow Appalachian Valley, hardwood ridges rising on both sides, Caney Fork Creek running past. Sitting in the middle of it is a soapstone boulder, roughly 16 feet long. It carries about 1,548 carved designs, more than any other petroglyph boulder in the eastern United States. 1,458 of them are cup marks, 47 are curved lines. 10 are stick figures, none of it has been read. This began as an industrial site. Soapstone is soft enough to carve into cooking bowls, and people were quarrying this outcrop more than 3,000 years ago. Then, around 1,500 years ago, somebody started carving symbols instead. The carving continued intermittently from about 500 AD until roughly 1700, when European settlement broke the tradition. The Cherokee explanation is older than the archaeological one. Judaculla was a slant-eyed giant and master of all game animals, with 7 fingers on each hand. On the lower right face of the boulder is what the Cherokee identify as his handprint. 7 fingers. The Parker family protected the rock on their farm for nearly a century and gave the land to Jackson County in 1959. There is a boardwalk around it now because the carvings are eroding. 1,000 years of someone writing something down and not one person alive can read a line of it. Number 8. The Blythe Intaglios. You cannot see them from the ground. They are scraped into the desert pavement of the Colorado Desert, about 15 miles north of Blythe, California, on two low mesas west of the Colorado River. 6 figures, human and animal, arranged in 3 groups within 1,000 feet of one another. Some are more than 100 feet across. That is the whole problem. Stand beside one and you are standing inside a line. There is no position on the ground where the figure resolves into a picture. They were made by removing the darker surface stones to expose lighter soil underneath, with the displaced rocks stacked along the edges to hold the outline. The Colorado Desert holds the only known desert intaglios in North America. More than 200 of them. The Mojave and the Quection never lost them. In their tradition, the human figures represent Mastemho, the creator of all life. Everyone else was simply blind to them through the Spanish, through the gold rush, through the railroads, until an Army Air Corps pilot named George Palmer flew over the Colorado Desert in the early 1932 and looked down. His report led to a survey by a curator from the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. Then, Depression funding ran out, and nothing serious happened for about 20 years. In 1952, the National Geographic Society and the Smithsonian sent a team, and the aerial photographs ran that September. By then there was tire damage. General Patton's tank crews had trained in that desert during the Second World War and driven straight across the figures. Some of those tracks are still there. The age is unsettled. 13 radiocarbon dates run from 900 BC to 1200 AD. Other estimates put them at 450 to 2,000 years old. All 6 survive, behind 2 lines of fencing, free, open at any hour. They were never lost. We just had nowhere to stand. Number 7. Meadowcroft Rockshelter. In 1955, a groundhog dug a burrow into a hillside on a farm in Avella, Pennsylvania, and threw prehistoric debris out onto the grass. The farmer was Albert Miller. He was not an archaeologist, but he recognized what he was looking at, Native American artifacts. Beneath a natural rock overhang above Cross Creek, he reported it. Then he waited. For 18 years, nobody came. American archaeology at the time ran on a rule known as Clovis first. Nobody was in the Americas before roughly 13,000 years ago. The rule was held so firmly that most excavators simply stopped digging when they reached the Clovis layer. There was nothing below it, so there was no point looking. In 1973, James Adovazio of the University of Pittsburgh finally arrived. The first things he hit were beer cans and campfire remains. Below that, older steel cans. Below that, colonial-era glass. Below that, pre-contact material. People had been sheltering under the same overhang in an unbroken stack. He dug past the Clovis line. There were people underneath it. The site has produced over 20,000 artifacts, more than 2,000 stone flakes and tools, 150 fire pits, and roughly 1 million animal and plant remains. A cut and burnt deer antler came back at 16,175 years. Give or take 975. The evidence points to continuous habitation for at least 16,000 years, possibly 19. It is still contested. Scholars continue to dispute whether Meadowcroft is genuinely pre-Clovis, and roughly 1 in 5 scientists surveyed think the dates are wrong. The excavation face is preserved exactly as it was left, under a protective enclosure. You stand in front of 16,000 years, rendered as a wall of stripes. Albert Miller was right the whole time. He just had to wait 18 years for anyone to come and tell him so. Number 6. The Bighorn Medicine Wheel. The clock at 9,642 feet. That is the elevation on Medicine Mountain in northern Wyoming, where somebody laid out a wheel of limestone 80 feet across. 28 spokes radiate from a central cairn about 12 feet wide and 2 feet high, large enough to hold a seated person. 5 smaller cairns sit around the rim, and a 6th just outside it, joined to the center by a single spoke. For most of the year you cannot reach it. snow covers everything. In the warm months, you walk the last mile and a half on a closed road because vehicles are not permitted up to the wheel itself. In 1974, the astronomer John Eddy published a paper in Science on its alignments. The cairns line up with the summer solstice and with the rising points of specific stars. Fomalhaut rises 28 days before the solstice, Aldebaran 2 days before it, Rigel 28 days after, Sirius 28 days after that. A chain of celestial events spaced 28 days apart on a wheel with 28 spokes. Nobody can say how old it is. Rock does not carbon date. Everything available, ceramic sherds from a 1958 dig, early 19th century glass trade beads found near the central cairn, a wood fragment giving a tree ring date of 1760, could have been left there by someone visiting a structure that was already ancient. Estimates run from under 1,000 years to well over 2,000. It is not a ruin. Spiritual leaders from the Arapaho, Bannock, Blackfeet, Cheyenne, Crow, Kootenai, Salish, Plains Cree, Shoshone, and Sioux nations still hold ceremony there. Visitors are asked to walk clockwise, the way the sun goes. The rope fence around it is hung with cloth. Prayer ties and tobacco bundles. The wind up there is constant and loud, and it moves everything except the stones. Number 5. The Great Serpent Mound. The ridge in Adams County, Ohio, that the Serpent is built along, is the eroded rim of a meteorite impact crater. It is between 5 and 9 miles across, less than 320 million years old, and it is the only confirmed impact structure in the state. Early Ohio geologists could not account for it. They called it a sunken mountain, then an ancient volcanic eruption, before anyone established what had actually happened there. The land is geologically wrong in a way that shows on the surface, and somebody chose that exact ridge. What they built on it runs 1,348 feet, the largest serpent effigy in the world, winding along the plateau with its jaws open around an oval shape, usually described as an egg. Features of the mound align with the summer solstice sunset and less clearly with the winter solstice sunrise. Here's the detail that stops people cold. Nobody knows who built it. Frederick Ward Putnam of Harvard excavated the Serpent in the late 19th century and found nothing inside. No bodies, no tools, no pottery. There are burial mounds in the surrounding park, but not one human remain has ever been found in the effigy itself. That absence is the entire problem. Every other mound in the Ohio Valley identifies its builders by what is inside it. This one is empty. So archaeologists dated it by what was buried beside it and called it Adena. That held for a century. Then in 1991, charcoal taken from inside the mound came back at around AD 1070, which points to the fort ancient culture instead, roughly 1,000 years too late. Then, in 2014, a new set of dates came back at around 300 BC, and the Adena were back. Some researchers argue the 1070 date matches Halley's Comet, which crossed North American skies in 1066, and that the Serpent is that comet drawn on the ground. The objection is blunt. Comet tails are straight, this one coils. The current best guess is the least satisfying one available. One, people may have built it, and another rebuilt it 1,000 years apart on the same ridge, in the same shape. It is fully intact, open to the public, with an observation tower and a museum, and it still draws crowds at the solstice. Whoever they were, they stood on that ridge and understood that it was different from everywhere else. We opened this video with a golf course in Newark, Ohio. That story is number 4, and it is next. If you are enjoying the deep dive so far, drop a thumbs up and tell us in the comments which of these you had never heard of before today. Number 4. The Octagon Earthworks. In Newark, Ohio, a 50-acre octagon of earthen walls is joined by a short passage to a 20-acre circle sitting above the floodplain of Raccoon Creek. It belongs to a larger complex of mounds and embankments covering 4.5 square miles. The Hopewell built it somewhere between 2,000 and 1,600 years ago. The 8 walls of the Octagon align with the points at which the moon rises and sets across its full 18.6-year cycle. The Ohio Supreme Court, in a written opinion, described that geometry as unparalleled, and Justice Donnelly wrote that of all known prehistoric earthworks in the world, it offers a unique example of human ingenuity. Ohio History Connection describes the site as part cathedral, part cemetery, part astronomical observatory. Raw materials found there came from as far west as the Rocky Mountains, which means people crossed the continent to be present for whatever happened inside those walls. The complex once covered around 3,000 acres. Less than 10% survives. In 1892, voters in Licking County raised their own taxes to preserve what was left. Sit with that for a second, because of what happened next. In 1911, the preserved land was turned into a golf course. By the 1932nd, the state had leased it to the Mound Builders Country Club on terms that ran to the year 2078. For 115 years, the most precise pre-Columbian lunar instrument in North America was maintained as fairway mowed. Irrigated, driven over in carts, its walls used as hazards, hole number 3 sat inside a 155-foot circular earthen enclosure built 2,000 years ago. The site was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in September 2023. Getting it back took 5 years of litigation. A county judge ruled in 2019 that the Historical Society could reclaim the lease by eminent domain. Ohio Supreme Court upheld that 5-1 in December 2022. A settlement was reached in August 2024 for a confidential sum, and the club used the money to buy a different course nearby. The Octagon opened for full public access on the 1st of January 2025. More than 800 people walked in that day. As of September last year, staff were still out on the grounds documenting the cart paths, the sand traps, and the tee boxes. They are mapping a golf course so they can erase it carefully off the top of a 2,000-year-old observatory. Number 3, the Winnemucca Lake Petroglyphs. The oldest art in America, and you cannot see it. There is a lake basin in northwestern Nevada with no lake in it. Winnemucca Lake is gone. What remains is a flat white pan ringed by bare desert mountains, holding the shape of water that is no longer there. On the west side of that basin stands a partly collapsed mound of tufa, a calcium carbonate crust that forms only on rock which has spent long periods submerged. The boulder faces are covered in carvings, deep ones cut at a scale of a meter or more. Some are simple lines and swirls. Others resemble trees or flowers, or connected diamonds, or the veins running through a leaf. They are the oldest dated petroglyphs in North America. Arriving at that date took an unusual piece of work because rock carvings contain nothing to radiocarbon, so the team dated the lake instead. Led by the geochemist Larry Benson with Eugene Hattori of the Nevada State Museum, John Southen of UC Irvine, and Benjamin Alec of the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe, they established the elevation at which ancient Lake Lahontan would spill over Emerson Pass 3,960 feet and cored sediment from neighboring Pyramid Lake to reconstruct water levels across 17,000 years. That gave them the 2 windows when these particular boulders stood above the waterline and could physically have been carved. Between 14,800 and 13,200 years ago, or between 11,300 and 10,500. Either answer makes them the oldest rock art dated on this continent. At the older end, more than twice the age of the pyramids, the one method that could have narrowed it further was scraping material from inside the grooves. The Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe did not permit it, and Benson worked only with non-invasive techniques alongside the carvings. It is their land. Asked what the symbols mean, Benson said, "The team has no idea." He described them as beautiful, deeply cut, unusually large, for the region, and you cannot go and look. The site sits on the Pyramid Lake Paiute Reservation, posted with no trespassing signs, close to outsiders after repeated vandalism. The oldest art on the continent, and the right thing to do when you reach that sign is turn the car around. Number 2. Watson Brake. A timber operation in Ouachita Parish, Louisiana, cut the trees off a stretch of floodplain, and 11 low earthen rises appeared that nobody had been able to see before. A local resident named Rekha Bonberg-Jones recognized what they were and reported them. That is how the oldest earthwork mound complex in North America was found. Watson Brake sits in Ouachita River bottomland, flat, humid cypress and dense secondary growth. 11 mounds, 3 to 25 feet tall, linked by ridges into an oval roughly 900 feet across. From a car, it still looks like nothing but woods. The archaeologist Joe Saunders walked the site and noticed something off. The artifacts characteristic of Poverty Point, the Louisiana complex then believed to be the oldest of its kind, were not there. In 1993, he and Thurman Allen, a soil scientist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, augured a core into the tallest mound. 1 meter down, they found a reddish, clay-enriched soil horizon. A layer of dirt that takes several thousand years to form. It was sitting underneath something people had built. Radiocarbon dating of charcoal beneath the mound basis put the start of construction at 5,400 to 5,300 years ago. The findings were published in Science in 1997, and American Archaeology had to move the date of the oldest earthwork construction on the continent back by nearly 2,000 years. Watson Brake predates Poverty Point by about 1900. It is older than the Egyptian pyramids. It is older than Stonehenge. Here is what makes it different. The discipline had a rule. Monumental earthworks require agriculture. You need a food surplus to feed people who are not out foraging. You need people staying in one place. You need somebody in charge to make them build. The people who raised Watson Brake had none of that. They were mobile hunter-gatherers fishing the Ouachita and foraging the floodplain. No maize, no pottery, no evidence of chiefs. And they kept coming back, generation after generation, across centuries, adding to it. All 11 mounds survive. The site is partly on private property and is not open for casual visits. They had no reason at all to build it. They built it anyway, and then their grandchildren came back and built more. Number 1. White Sands. Start with the light. The Tularosa Basin in southern New Mexico is filled with gypsum sands so white that the landscape gives you nothing to measure yourself against. No scale. No depth. The San Andres and Sacramento Mountains ring the horizon, and everything between them reads as blank. The wind moves across the dunes constantly, and the sound it makes is oddly flat, deadened. There's no vegetation for it to catch on. Out past the dunes, the ground goes hard and level. This is the bed of a lake that is no longer there, and pressed into that pale sediment are footprints, bare human feet, toes legible, arches legible. Not 1 or 2. Hundreds of thousands of them. They are between 21,000 and 23,000 years old. For most of the 20th century, American archaeology ran on a single number, about 13,000 years, the age of the Clovis toolkit, and therefore the assumed age of humanity in the Americas. Anything older was treated as an error. In 2019, a team from Bournemouth University, working with the National Park Service, excavated footprints at White Sands. In September 2021, USGS researchers and an international team announced the dates. 22,860 years, give or take 320. 21,130, give or take 250. That is the middle of the last ice age, when the ice sheets should have made the journey impossible. The challenge was immediate, and it was technical. The dates came from seeds of an aquatic plant, and aquatic plants can take up dissolved carbon from water rather than air, which can make a sample read older than it is. So the researchers went back with entirely different methods. Radiocarbon dating of terrestrial pollen from the same layers. Optically stimulated luminescence dating of quartz grains from inside the footprint horizon itself. Different sample types, different techniques, a different laboratory. Published in Science in October 2023, and both reproduce the original range. A further study in Science Advances in June 2025 supported it again. It is still not universally accepted. Some archaeologists consider the evidence circumstantial and want directly dated skeletons or genetic material before they will move. That argument is live, and it is legitimate. But consider what these numbers describe. Not a tool, not a bone, not a wall, people walking. Lutoli in Tanzania is the most famous ancient footprint site on Earth. It runs about 88 feet and holds fewer than 100 tracks. White Sands holds hundreds of thousands on the surface and in trenches dug 3 feet down and deeper. It is the largest collection of fossilized Ice Age footprints in the world. Some are ghost tracks, surfacing only under particular moisture conditions, and then vanishing again. The footprint localities are research ground, not public trail. You cannot walk out to them on your own. And nobody knows who these people were. There is no name attached to a single one of those feet, and no one can say whether anyone living is descended from them. They crossed a wetland beside a lake that no longer exists. They went wherever they were going, and 23,000 years later, the mud is still holding the shape of them. There are far more of these than fit on one list. Places across the country where the honest answer is still that nobody knows. My own favorite is Watson Break because it was built by people the textbooks insisted could not have built anything at all. Which one surprised you most, and which one did we miss? Tell us in the comments. If you want more of these, subscribe.